All right, here we go. We're still going, and oh my God, what we have next? We have Carl Camden and Hollie Heikkinen. Carl, how you doing, buddy?
I'm having a
Good
great
to see
time.
you. Good to
Good
see
seeing
you.
you
Well, like
again.
to see you, Hollie. How
Hi,
are you
Matt.
doing?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. So, Carl, you are the co-founder of iPSE, the Associate for Independent Workers. Hollie, the CEO of iWorker. You actually both are partners or on the iPSE side, right?
Correct.
iPSE is actually my client.
He is actually your client. Yeah. Now, listen, I got a chance to see both your keynotes, and they were amazing. At the luncheon keynotes. It's been a long day. Lots of content, lots of thought leaders, lots of information to consume. Carl, what's your big takeaway from today? What can we pick up?
So I leave with more hope that we're going to come up with solutions to make the world fair for America's independent workers, and they are going to have access to health care, and that there's a lot of great people here who care that they do.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Hollie, how about you? What's your big takeaway?
My takeaway is that technology actually is probably the foundational element that's going to change the face of healthcare for Americas.
You know, that's really well said. In fact, what we learned today is the connectivity, especially when telemedicine and blockchain is really at the core of all that, right? Infrastructure and connectivity. You know, you heard an interview earlier this morning with the ambassador of Kosovo. She talked about how during after everything went down in Kosovo, they rebuilt with a connectivity infrastructure that now they can service pretty much the 80–90% of the whole country via telemedicine. Why are we lagging so far behind here? And when we are actually infrastructure-wise, we're way ahead of everybody else.
It's always easier to build from scratch than it is to convince boards and people that you should tear down the old to build the new. It's costly, it's uncertain, but you have no choice when your country's been bombed as much as Kosovo was, but to start from scratch. And she's done a great job. Our country, she represented a tremendous job that's been done in Kosovo to rebuild healthcare from scratch. That's what the U.S. would look like if we were doing it from scratch.
So basically, necessity breeds invention. And with the lack of fundamental infrastructure, you went to virtual. That's fascinating. Now, you've got an interesting story. You told a little bit about it up there. You've come from some rough times, which brought you to where you're at now. Now you want to empower gig workers and 1099 workers with some layer of protection, some sort of benefits, and that's where you guys collectively are doing at iPSE, which is advocating for those workers. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, so iWorker Innovations is a national insurance brokerage and a platform as a service company. So I'm partnering up with companies that have the right tools and resources that can serve the independent workforce. So these are people that don't traditionally have access to a portable benefit structure. They don't have retirement planning and access. They don't have protection from discrimination or workplace safety, all these types of things. So we're actually doing a lot of things under a single entity.
What can the average everyday person do to help move advocacy and education, move it along a little quicker? Because I mean that's really what we're talking about, education, adoption, right? What can people do to help that?
Well, let us hear your voice, and I would say join iPSE, the National Association of Independent Workers. The website is iPSE-U.S. That's the number one thing they can do. Let us communicate with them and connect with them so we can hear what they have to say and then properly represent them federally and on state level.
I love that, and you guys are definitely on the federal stage. And congratulations on the launch of the National Independent Workers Day.
Right. No, I think that Hollie describes this group often as an invisible workforce. These are 30-some million people who are making their money this way. They're happy. They're contributing trillions to the U.S. GDP, and people don't see them. They don't hear them. And most importantly, the government doesn't help them. But we're going to fix that.
You, on one of your speeches, or I think it was on the panel, you had mentioned something about how our workforce is growing, but the coverage is shrinking. Can you touch a little bit more on that? Because we're the only modern country where health benefits is not a de facto. It's not part of our right as a citizen. And you elaborate a little bit more. Can you touch on a little on that?
Yeah, we decided coming out of the Great Depression that we should be providing benefits to workers. That was a good way to help the country grow, and it did. And then we moved on to decide that even in eras of wage and price controls, we could help workers by giving them insurance. But in the rest of the world, you get insurance no matter how much money you make, whether you work or don't work, because they believe that access to health care is a fundamental human right. And by the way, so do I. I don't think that you should have to put your family at risk because you work in a way that the government doesn't favor.
And I'd like to add to that, Matt. So what's important to me, though, is that we are a country founded on choice. And as you see, and you speak to people all across the United States, choice has become a prominent word. And I think keeping the health care on the private market or in the private market is what we need to do as well.
That's fascinating. So, on the privatization side, providing education and resources to self-insured employers and independent contractors. We use everydaycare.com, Home Advisor, Angie's List, but those workers are gig workers. And when you think about as much as the reason why they're gig workers is because they have other stuff going on, they have families, they need supplemental income, but they don't have the fundamental benefits that full-time workers do. How big is this market that we're talking about?
The market is a third of the American workforce, and I think the easiest way to talk about this, 22 million Americans make 100% of their money this way, and they love it. Another 12 million people make a significant part of their money this way, and they hope to make all of their money this way. There are some independent workers who want nothing more than to have a job. There's a whole lot of employees who want nothing more than to not have a job and to be an independent worker. And the workforce is in the process of sorting itself out. But when it's done, the majority of American workers will be independent workers, and they're never going to want to go back to being an employee.
As someone who has insurance, I have insurance, I pay for my insurance, and I look at some of the supplemental plans that are out there, and I think to myself, why am I paying for this full coverage when supplemental is really all I need? And employers look at that as a cost that needs to be bared on the employee. So those that can't afford, the supplemental is, a lot of times, more than sufficient. How are we going to get those programs out?
Yeah, it's going to take a bit of change and really some policies. There's IRS tax codes that prohibit us from putting certain products into an association membership that would allow an instant access, underwritten and direct access constantly. We have to fix a few of those problems before they're going to happen. And then a big thing I've been working on is spending quite a bit of time with some of the larger insurance companies in the country. A lot of them realize that the times are changing, the way people are working is changing, and that some of these big companies that are so used to administering plans through the employer-employee relationship, they're going to lose some of their market share. So they're actually taking a look at this independent workforce.
It's fascinating. I'm a technologist and an entrepreneur. I cover the World Economic Forum for CNBC, Equities, ABC, and some of the other networks from time to time. I'm here covering this event, but I've founded some technology companies and ad networks, and I look at the insurance industry almost the way I look at managed a dedicated hosting like co-location. We have cloud-based computing today, which is that you just buy what you need and you don't need any more. It's very, very efficient. The insurance is still in a very brick-and-mortar infrastructure, and we don't necessarily need all of that heavy brick-and-mortar infrastructure. A light program or pay-as-we-go program approach may actually plug the gap for that market.
I think there's lots of insurance alternatives. The question will be to find the ones that fit the different work styles best. When you have a workforce that chooses to engage for 6 months on a project, but then they take 6 weeks off and then they come back and engage for 3 months, it doesn't fit a typical insurance model. It tends to raise the costs that are there. And so I think that the insurance industry that Hollie comes from has got innovation to do, as well as how we go about reducing the financial penalties that individual workers are paying to gain access to these benefits.
That's actually really well said. So there's a market for supplemental. There's a market full of brick and mortar. There are markets for each of these things. Where do you see the insurance market in the next 12 months?
I see most of the larger companies really moving towards technology. They understand that there is a possible use with apps and different things like that with companies, for example, like Carl Camden used to be the CEO of Kelly Services. It would be possible for them to use an app to administer and monitor those independent workers that are in that sphere. And that would be the way to have people only pay for what they need as they use it.
And part of the job that we've got to do is to help the people who are actually making it possible for these independent workers to find assignments and to work. We have to reduce the fear they have of running afoul of arcane government laws, regulations. They should be able to step in and help the people they deploy without worrying that the IRS or the Department of Labor is going to be coming after them.
You know, the gig economy, it's growing so fast, it's almost impossible to predict exactly where it's going to end up. But if it's organizations like yours that are keeping up with the changing times, and we need more of it. We need more of it. I'm really glad you guys decided to come out and support the event. Big takeaways. What was your big takeaway for today? If you're leaving here, the net takeaway, telemedicine, blockchain, you saw some panels. What was your favorite part of the whole thing?
So we often talk about people returning to the way they used to work for thousands of years, basically as independent workers and from their homes. As I sit in this last session talking about telehealth, I often sat there in amazement, thinking and realizing that they were saying that they were just at some conference in Amsterdam, a global conference where they were basically talking about taking medicine back to the home. So I just find this very interesting that we're constantly moving back to what we used to do. So it's not a bad thing. We're just using the technologies to be able to work the way we want to work and live the way we want to live.
Is that a decentralization of the current healthcare system?
It will ultimately end up being a decentralization, but even more so a customer-empowered, effort.
Well said. That's a very well said. Well said. All right, Carl, big man. I almost forgot we have a former Fortune 500 CEO standing right next to us. What's the big takeaway? All the content, everything consumed. What's your favorite part of today?
You know what? I think that the progress that the blockchain people have made is tremendous. Especially when you start having people who are working for shorter and shorter periods of times at companies, and for people whose insurance needs aren't being met by that one doctor that they went to for everything back when they were, younger, but now 100 doctors, 50 doctors, but they go straight to the specialist. They skip go and move on to the end target. That having a system that securely manages the aggregation of that medical data, securely manages the aggregation of the diagnoses, and in the future will allow AIs to sweep through it and to point out problems that a doctor wouldn't know because the doctor doesn't have the same breadth of embedded knowledge that an AI would, and say, and by the way, doctor, you should be checking about this, because this collection of symptoms often represents a specific issue.
Well, you just touched on the really cool part. It's the hidden value within what the immutable ledgers and the data can reveal within a blockchain stack. There's information we don't know what we don't know, and they'll produce that data and those outcomes. But listen, it's great to have you both here today. We're going to be wrapping up today's coverage of the Converge2X conference. I'm Matt Bird. You're watching ABC, NBC, Fox, and CBS, our syndicated partners. Special thanks out to equities.com for underwriting the program today. And I think we have one or two more guests, but at least I got to tell you guys, it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
All right.
The 2019 Converge2Xcelerate Conference is brought to you by IEEE, the world's largest technical professional organization for the advancement of technology. Boehringer Ingelheim, passionately working to improve healthcare. NASCO, advancing digital health together.